Imagine a lonely cabin hidden deep in the Montana woods, where snow falls so thick it swallows every sound. Inside, an old veteran named Sam Keller lives in quiet peace with memories of a war long past. But one night, when the wind screams and the lights flicker, he hears an engine stop outside his home and realizes something, or someone, is coming for him. What happens next will test the strength of faith, the power of family, and the courage of one loyal dog. Where are you watching from tonight? Tell us in the comments below, and get ready for a story that will warm your heart even in the coldest snow. Night pressed down on Pine Hollow like a woolen sky, thick with snow that moved in slow, eternal sheets, turning the pines into white-limbed saints, and the gravel road into a pale ribbon that seemed to begin nowhere and end in a hush. The thermometer nailed to the porch post at the Keller homestead sulked below zero, and the wind that licked the eaves carried a distant metallic tang from the old sawmill by the creek. In the cabin's main room, where the dark logs held the heat of a stubborn fire, Sam Keller sat in a ladder-back chair and listened to the storm speak through the chinks. He was 67, tall in the way of men who once carried heavy rucksacks and never forgot to stand straight, with shoulders that time had rounded like river stones. A thin white scar curved along his jaw, the way frost curves at a window corner, and his gray hair, cut short as if a regulation still lived inside him, bristled beneath a threadbare wool cap. He dressed like memory, denim shirt gone soft with years, corded belt, wool socks tucked into scuffed boots, and moved with the quiet caution of a man who had learned long ago to treat silence as both shelter and teacher. In town, people said he'd served in Vietnam and brought home a kind of weather in his chest that made him prefer winter. The fewer people around, the less noise, the more honest the world felt. He kept the homestead not for profit but for promise, an heirloom of ground his great-grandfather had cleared and his late wife, Marianne, had loved, with a small apple orchard out back that he still pruned every October, talking under his breath as if the trees were steady friends. On the mantel, next to a faded wedding photo, where Marianne laughed with her whole face, a battery radio murmured local weather advisories. Road closures toward Windridge Lake, powder drifting waist-deep on gullied slopes, a reminder to check flues. The phone rang, not the old rotary which sat like a retired sheriff on a side table, but the new cellular slab he tolerated because his son insisted. The screen flashed Bureau of Land Management, though the caller ID had an extra space where none should be, a tiny tell that the mind might dismiss, but a veteran's gut would not. He answered anyway, voice low as embers. The man on the other end sounded smooth but taut, vowels scrubbed of place, consonants clipped like shears. He introduced himself without a name, spoke of easements, environmental repositioning, and a friendly opportunity linked to an upcoming initiative. He said the agency had reviewed holdings near Windridge and found parcels best transitioned to stewardship partners. His phrase, who could guarantee long-term watershed integrity while creating clean energy jobs. When Sam asked for a statute, section, or plain English, the caller's tone thinned. He said there had been incidents in remote cabins, break-ins, fires from faulty wiring, unpreventable tragedies. He advised signing the transition contract when representatives arrived. He promised it would be for the best. Sam's silence worked on the line like a cold on a flame, and the caller finally filled the quiet with a last, gentle pressure. At your age, sir, winter is risk enough. The connection died to a glassy click. Outside, the snow's static sharpened. He stood, crossed to the rifle cabinet, and considered, then closed it again. He wasn't hunting fear tonight, only facts. He checked the barn camera feed, blurry, a snowfall of pixels, and the porch motion sensor, dead for 2 days under rime. He banked the fire, pulled on his parka, and stepped onto the porch. The night bit at his cheeks and blew salt into his beard. Somewhere deep in the timber, a branch popped like a small bone. He listened, the way soldiers listen, past the first obvious sounds into the seams. That was when he caught it, the faintest growl of an engine out on the county road, then the soft hush of tires surrendering to fresh powder. Headlights limned the snowfall and vanished, not sweeping like a pass-through, but settling into a posture of approach. He waited, counted heartbeats the way he used to count seconds to extract. 3 silhouettes coalesced at the tree line, hoods up, figures built like men who lift, because they must rather than for show. They wore insulated work jackets and snow pants spattered with old oil, not new. One carried a tube like it housed rolled maps. Another held a hard plastic case the size of a typewriter. Third had nothing but his hands in his pockets and a posture of ownership. The leader, later Sam would think of him only as the one with the watchman's eyes, walked as if the ground belonged to him until told otherwise. He was perhaps late 30s, average height, hips set a little forward like a man used to giving orders and dodging consequences. Pale stubble freckled his jaw, and a tiny crescent scar notched his upper lip. The color of chapped skin. His voice was easy, rehearsed. He said good evening and introduced the group as contractors assisting Vale Corp., a name that slid over the snow like a skate. He cracked the hard case, produced documents in heavy sleeves, and spoke of a purchase agreement. Fair, generous, inevitable. He mentioned timelines and compliance and the conversation we had with your agency. Sam studied the papers. The numbers were blunt, the clauses were sly. The notarization carried a stamp from a county across the state where, now that he thought of it, a sheriff had been indicted last summer. He kept his eyes on the leader and spoke with the evenness of a clean horizon. You boys should head back while you still know the way. The one with the map tube shifted, revealing tattooed knuckles, letters that once spelled love or hate, but had been over-inked into something accidental. The quiet one, hands still in pockets, watched the door latch as if imagining it open. The leader's smile tilted. He invoked the call, the agency, safety, winter. He made winter sound like a debt. When Sam stepped to return the papers, the leader did not move to accept them. The space between them cooled. Nobody wants trouble, the leader said, and the man with the tube chuffed steam that wasn't laughter. But nights like this, accidents happen. A wind pushed across the porch, scattering fine snow like sifted flour. Sam remembered the jungle rain that used to arrive in sheets and leave everything smelling of copper. He had learned then that fear speaks big while courage speaks small. I don't sign what I don't believe, he said, and the leader gave a tiny nod as if he had reached the last page of a script. It began with a shove, nothing dramatic, just the practical violence of men who know windows break and ribs bruise. The man with the tube tried to wedge a shoulder past the door. Sam pivoted, got a hand on the frame, and the leader's arm flashed out. Not a punch exactly, but a lesson. Sam stumbled, caught himself on the rail, tasted old iron rising in his throat, and the ridiculous thought that Marianne would scold him for letting strangers track slush into the house. The quiet one stepped closer, fist bunching in his pocket like a weather system thinking about lightning. Then the night broke in half. Headlights carved the snowfall, bright and straight, sweeping the porch in a white blaze before fixing on the three figures. A siren did not wail. The sound would have skittered wild over the ice, but a single authoritative whoop thudded the ribs of the trees. The SUV that longed for traction found it in studded tires, and the driver braked with the kind of calm that belongs to people who carry badges and burdens they would never name. Luke Keller's door opened. He was 36, broad-shouldered with the durable build of a man who runs uphill because downhill is too easy, 6 feet even. Brown hair clipped short as a ranger's brush line, eyes clear and blue, but cooled by years of winter patrol and the human weather he had to cross. He wore a state police parka that had earned its scuffs, a radio mic snow-dusted at the shoulder, and the sort of calm, precise face that seemed to listen without moving. In town, people said he carried himself like compass north. Those who'd served beside him would tell you that when fear spiked, Luke's breathing went slow. He had the Keller jaw but Marianne's mouth, and when he smiled, and he did now, a fraction, that smile could thaw an entire kitchen. On the passenger side, a sleek shape sprang down into the snow and landed with weightless purpose. Rex was a German shepherd of 4 winters, sable black along the saddle with tan at the legs and a pale brush along the muzzle that made him look older than he was. His ears stood high with an alert's poetry. Eyes dark and steady as hearth coal, chest deep, waist tucked. The athletic taper of a working dog's who live for verbs, seek, hold, guard, heel. His training had been thorough, tracking, apprehension, search and rescue, and his temperament was balanced bonfire, contained heat, instant light. He had his own small history, a broken dew claw from a log fall on a spring exercise, a scar you'd miss above the left hock from barbed wire during a flood search. The memory of one handler's funeral, where he sat so still, people thought he had turned to stone. He loved snow in the way some creatures love their native element, and when he tasted tonight's air, his tail flicked once, not giddy, but certain. "Evening," Luke said, voice mild as lamplight. And though he was a guest at his father's house, he carried the authority of a man who has to be the grown-up in other people's emergencies. The leader's eyes did a quick math. Badge, dog, stance. He tried a grin. "Just neighbors trying to help the old man with paperwork," he said, and the quiet one finally took his hands out of his pockets, where they hovered as if ashamed. Rex settled into a heel position at Luke's thigh, gaze fixed at the leader's shoulder. "Strange hour for civics," Luke observed. He stepped sideways, not forward, making room to put the porch light behind the men so their faces were readable. He didn't lift his hands, didn't reach for his belt. The snow carried their exhalations up like smoke. When the man with the tube flexed his grip and aimed his shoulder toward Sam again, Rex's body changed, the tense-to-spring coil that belonged to the moment just before the sled rockets forward. Luke didn't need a command, but gave one anyway, quiet as a prayer. "Stay." The word settled Rex's weight. "Here's how this goes," Luke said, and the way he said it didn't feel like a threat so much as a root. "You place the paperwork on the porch. You take your hands away from your pockets. You head back to your truck, you get in, and you reverse every foot you came. If you want to talk, you schedule it at the station in the daylight with the recorder on. You do not touch my father, his house, or his door." The leader inhaled, slow and theatrical, measuring how much of his ego would freeze if he backed away. Pride is a thin coat in this kind of weather. He made his mistake with a glance, a 1-second sliver toward the trees where the road bent, as if to make sure their driver waited. Luke saw it, tucked it away, and smiled for real this time. "You boys brought chains," he said. "Good, you'll need them." Rex's ears angled back and then forward, catching something under the wind, a whisper of automatic idle, a faint whine near the tree line. It meant the men intended not just a visit, but a campaign. The leader dropped the papers. They landed with a slap that sounded wet. "We'll be in touch," he said. "You'll find we're the reasonable ones." "No," Luke said pleasantly. "You'll find we're the lawful ones." The man with the tube muttered something about accidents. The quiet one looked as if he might apologize just to keep peace with sleep later. They backed down the steps, not turning their backs until they reached the yard, then trudged toward the pale egg of their headlights. Snow took their shapes back into itself, erasing outlines with a soft, methodical hand. Rex remained statuesque until the taillights dwindled to embers. Only then did he shift, nose dipping to the porch boards, reading a book the rest of them could not see. The storm moved in an inch, and the pines creaked like tall ships. Luke put a hand on his father's arm, checking the steadiness beneath the coat before asking with his eyes if he was all right. And Sam answered with the smallest nod that said, "Both I am and I will be." "Call came an hour ago," Sam said, voice quieter than the snow. "Said BLM, threats dressed up as weather." Luke's jaw worked but didn't lock. "Spoofs are getting cleaner," he said, "but not clean enough." He crouched at the porch edge where the men had stood, and Rex moved with him, the two of them a single intent. That was when Rex halted and nosed a shadow near the step, a smear that would be invisible to anyone who had not spent his life noticing. Luke's gloved fingers brushed the drift and uncovered a tiny black wafer no larger than a nickel, its edge nicked and shining like a tooth. A droplet darkened the snow beside it, a red bruise in a world of white. The device had adhesive on one face and, along its rim, a keyed ridge for a battery, jarred loose perhaps, when the leader's elbow knocked the rail. Luke lifted it into the porch light and saw the faint stamp of a serial run and a silk-screened logo stub wiped half away by snow. He didn't say the word tracker out loud. He didn't need to. Sam looked from the wafer to the night and back again, and in his eyes a winter long ago folded itself into this one, the way one map overlays another to show how the old trails become the new roads. "They plan to come back," Luke said, more to the device than to the air. "Or they plan to never leave." Rex sat, breath calm, eyes on his handler's face, as if awaiting the verb that would define the rest of the night. Luke slipped the wafer into an evidence pouch from his parka pocket, sealed it, and met his father's gaze. The storm pressed its white hand against the cabin windows and listened. "All right," Luke said softly, his voice steady as a plumb line. "We'll give them the daylight they don't want." Behind him, Rex's tail tapped once against the porch. In the yard, where the three men had stood, the snow had already begun to heal their footprints, but the tiny dark puncture of blood remained, a period at the end of a sentence that had just begun. Morning came without color. The storm had thinned but not gone. It lingered in ragged veils above the valley, draping the timberline in quiet exhaustion. Pine Hollow looked carved from glass, each branch and fence post lacquered with ice that caught the pale light of a sun still too weak to rise. Smoke drifted from the Keller chimney, fragile as breath. Luke Keller stood on the porch with a thermos of black coffee steaming in his glove. The night's confrontation had left a thin tension humming in his bones, that alertness soldiers never quite unlearn. Rex sat beside him, nose tilted to the wind. Every scent mattered to the dog. The burnt tang of the barn's fuel shed, the musky trace of deer, the faint ozone bite that sometimes follows electronics. Sam Keller stepped out behind him, wrapped in his old parka, a wool scarf Marianne had knitted before the sickness took her. His hands were still steady, but his voice rasped faintly when he spoke. "You didn't sleep." "Neither did you," Luke said. Rex's ears twitched. Somewhere down the slope, a crow cawed and then went silent. Luke crouched where the porch met the snow. The night's wind had erased most of the tracks, but near the drive he found a pair of deep grooves still crisp, the tread marks of heavy tires with metal studs. He scraped away frost with a pocket knife. "SUV," he murmured. "Probably four-wheel drive, chain-wrapped." They parked close enough to see the lights of the house. Sam watched in silence, the way old men watch their sons doing things that remind them of their own youth. Rex padded forward and sniffed along the edge of the drive. His tail gave a slow, deliberate sway before he pawed at something half-buried. Luke knelt again and uncovered a shard of black plastic with a curved edge, an embossed logo barely legible beneath the frost. Vailcorp Energy Division. He slipped it into an evidence bag. They didn't even bother to hide it. "Maybe they thought no one would care," Sam said. "They're wrong." By mid-morning, the snow clouds had thinned into a gray lid over the valley. Luke loaded Rex into his truck, a dented Ford with mud tires and a computer console wired to the police network. He radioed Deputy Ross Camden, an old friend from academy days. Ross was 40, broad, genial, with a beard that always seemed to have 2 days' head start on him. A Montana native, he had a slow drawl that fooled people into thinking he wasn't sharp. Luke knew better. Ross met him halfway down the ridge, his patrol SUV trailing steam. "Morning," Ross said, stepping out and pulling his gloves tight. "Heard you had company last night. 3 men, claimed to be contractors for Vailcorp." Ross whistled low. "Those corporate guys are getting bolder." He glanced at Rex, who was sniffing the snow near the bumper. "And that's the famous Rex. Heard about him saving that kid during the avalanche last year." Rex looked up at his name, eyes bright. Luke smiled faintly. "He still thinks every crisis is his job." They drove back toward the cabin to trace the route the intruders might have taken. Half a mile down the forestry road, Luke's GPS receiver picked up a faint beacon, the same frequency as the tracker they had found the night before. He tapped the screen. "Signal's active, routing to a repeater server in Denver." Ross frowned. "Vailcorp headquarters?" "Exactly." Luke downloaded the data to his laptop, noting coordinates, ping intervals, and a network ID encrypted under a corporate tag, Vail Energy Strategic Logistics. Whoever left the tracker wasn't a random thug. They were part of a system. Rex barked once, sharp and focused. He stood by a patch of churned snow beside a pine stump. Luke knelt and found a torn glove finger, the inside wet with half-frozen blood. He sealed it, his expression unreadable. "Somebody got hurt," Ross said. Luke nodded. "We'll run DNA when we're back at the station." As they climbed into the truck, a dark SUV passed them, heading toward the main road. Newer model, tinted windows, the kind that doesn't belong to locals. Luke noted the plate, but didn't turn his head. He knew when he was being watched. By noon, the small diner at Pine Hollow's crossroads filled with its usual mixture of truckers, loggers, and retired ranch hands. The bell over the door jingled as a woman entered, brushing snow from her coat. She carried a leather satchel, her auburn hair twisted in a loose bun that framed a face too alert to miss much. Eleanor Shaw had once been the youngest reporter at the Rocky Mountain Chronicle, winning regional awards for her coverage of rescue operations. She was 33 now, sharp-eyed, slender, and always carried the faint smell of coffee and notebook ink. People said she had the heart of an optimist, but the skepticism of someone who'd seen too many cover-ups. She spotted Luke at a corner booth, laptop open, Rex lying quietly at his feet. "I should have known I'd find you working instead of eating," she said. Luke looked up, surprise flickering into a grin. "Eleanor, thought you were still chasing blizzards out east." "I was," she said, sliding into the booth opposite him. "Until I got a tip worth freezing for." She set a file folder on the table. "Vale Corp. They're buying up every acre around Windridge Lake. Not for tourism, lithium reserves. The green energy campaign is a cover. Locals are being pushed out or bribed." Luke's jaw tightened. "They came to my father last night. Sent muscle with a fake land contract." Her eyes widened. "Already started here, then?" She glanced at Rex, who lifted his head and smiled. "Still working together, I see. Wouldn't be alive without him." They compared notes. Eleanor had obtained internal memos suggesting a shell company was filing permits for environmental testing, but importing heavy drilling equipment through Denver's rail yard. Luke cross-referenced the documents with state land records. "They filed for Pine Haven Development, same network ID I traced this morning. Ross arrived with coffee refills. Heard about Vale Corp. You planning to poke that hornet's nest?" "Already did," Luke said. Eleanor leaned forward. "Luke, if we can prove they're falsifying permits, we could expose the whole thing. But I need field evidence. Photos, samples, anything showing pre-drilling activity." Luke nodded toward Rex. "He can find what their machines can't hide." That afternoon, they hiked into the woods north of the property line, snow still knee-deep in places. The world was soundless except for the crunch of boots and Rex's steady breathing, the scent of pine pitch mixed with faint gasoline traces carried by the wind. Rex froze suddenly, tail stiff. He moved toward a cluster of firs near a frozen creek and began digging. Beneath the crust, Luke uncovered a metallic cylinder half buried in ice, a core sampling drill tube stamped Vale Environmental Survey Unit 03. Eleanor knelt beside him, brushing snow from the label. "That's proof," she whispered. "They've been testing already." Luke examined the ground. Tire impressions led away toward the ridge road. "They've been here for weeks," he said. Snow began to fall again, soft and relentless. Eleanor raised her camera, capturing the drill and tire marks before they vanished. "If I can get this to my editor, we can publish within days." Rex whined, low and uneasy. Luke followed his gaze to the ridge. A shape moved briefly among the trees, too large for deer, too upright for hiker. The shadow vanished, leaving only the whisper of falling snow. "Someone's watching," Luke said. They hurried back to the truck. As the engine turned over, Luke checked the rearview mirror. The tree line was empty, but he knew better than to trust emptiness. That evening, back at the cabin, Sam was chopping wood under the lantern's glow. Eleanor helped stack the logs, her breath forming little clouds. She glanced toward the mountains. "They'll come again, won't they?" Sam rested on the axe handle, looking up at the sky bruised with twilight. "They always do. People like that don't stop until something stronger stands in their way." Luke emerged from the house holding the evidence pouch. "Then we'll be that something." Rex trotted between them, carrying a chunk of ice that still smelled faintly of diesel. He dropped it at Luke's feet and wagged his tail once, as if to remind them the land itself was calling for guardians. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Then, let's give the land a voice." As the last light slipped behind the peaks, the valley seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere out there, machines were waiting under tarps, contracts sat unsigned, and men like Richard Vale were already planning their next move. But for now, in the small circle of lantern glow, 3 people and 1 loyal dog stood against the silence, their resolve hardening like the ice beneath their boots. The wind changed that night. It came rolling off the peaks with a low, restless hum, carrying the dry breath of something not natural. Gasoline. Snow drifts glittered like powdered glass under a swollen moon. Pine Hollow slept beneath a sheet of silver silence, unaware that danger had already found its way into the valley again. Inside the Keller homestead, the fire in the wood stove glowed low and steady. Luke sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, reviewing satellite images of the ridge Eleanor had photographed earlier that day. Beside him lay a spread of evidence bags, the tracker, the plastic shard with the Vale Corp logo, and samples from the drill site sealed with date and coordinates. Rex dozed near the door, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of a sentry who rests only because his human insists. Sam moved quietly about the kitchen, washing the dinner plates with deliberate patience. He'd aged well, weathered but not weakened, though there was something heavy in his movements tonight. The smell of fuel had reached him too. "You smell it?" Luke asked. Sam nodded. "Thought maybe the generator leaked again." "I checked it this afternoon. Lines are clean." The two men exchanged a look that said the same thing. Someone had been here. Rex stirred, nostrils flaring. His tail went still, the muscles along his shoulders stiffening. He let out a low growl, deep and certain. Luke stood, grabbed his flashlight, and motioned to his father. "Stay inside." But Sam Keller had never been a man who stayed behind walls while his son walked into the dark. He reached for the old Remington leaning by the door and followed. Outside, the cold bit instantly. The moonlight painted the snow in hues of pewter and blue. The barn loomed 50 yards from the cabin, its tin roof gleaming faintly under frost. Luke swept the beam across the yard, footprints fresh and hurried, leading toward the barn. Then the scent hit him full. Acrid, sharp, unmistakable. Gasoline poured over timber. "Rex!" The dog sprinted ahead, his paws throwing snow like sparks. The next instant, a thunderous whoosh split the night. A column of fire erupted from the side of the barn, red against white, a roar that swallowed the wind. Heat slammed into them. Flames danced up the old wood like serpents in prayer. "God almighty!" Sam breathed. Luke and Sam rushed forward. Luke tore off his coat, using it to beat back flames at the doorway. Sam grabbed a shovel and heaved snow against the walls. The fire crackled, eating through the dry beams faster than the cold could fight it. Inside, they kept old farming equipment, fuel cans, and winter feed. If the fire reached the back wall, the whole structure would go. "Dad, get back!" Luke shouted, but Sam was already pulling open the side door, swinging the shovel wildly. His scarf caught an ember and singed. Rex barked, circling them, then darted off toward the slope behind the barn, tracking movement no human could see. A dark SUV roared to life near the tree line, tires spinning on ice. Luke caught its shape for only a second, the glint of a Range Rover's rear badge. "Rex, go!" The shepherd launched forward, a streak of living light across the snow. Luke grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall and sprayed foam into the inferno, while Sam shoveled snow like a man beating back death itself. When the last canister emptied and the flames finally fell to embers, Luke stumbled out coughing, coat streaked with soot. The barn's front wall had collapsed inward, but the blaze was mostly out, just a wounded thing now, hissing into the night. Sam sank onto a snowbank, chest heaving. "You all right?" Luke asked. "I've been worse," Sam rasped, managing a grim smile. Rex returned minutes later, panting hard. Snow clung to his fur, and a small cut showed near his shoulder where ice had grazed him. In his jaws, he carried something. An envelope soaked with fuel and half-burned along the edges. Luke knelt, prying it open. Inside was a folded invoice, fuel delivery, Vale Corp Energy Division, issued to Nathan Cole. Attached to it was a laminated ID card, cracked but readable. The photo showed a man with angular features, cropped hair, and the faint arrogance of someone used to giving orders. "Name's Nathan Cole," Luke said aloud. "Assistant to Richard Vale, former Army engineer, court-martialed 5 years ago for arson in a combat zone." Sam exhaled slowly. "They've got professionals running this." By dawn, the barn was a black skeleton under drifting smoke. Eleanor arrived just as the sun broke through the clouds, her Jeep fishtailing up the driveway. She jumped out, scarf whipping in the wind. "Oh my God, what happened?" she asked, running toward the wreckage. "Arson," Luke said simply. "They wanted a warning." Eleanor knelt to photograph the charred ground, her gloved hands trembling slightly. "This will make headlines," she said, but only if I can get the story out before they bury it." She turned to Luke, her face lit by a strange mix of fear and resolve. "Vale Corp's PR team just announced they'll hold a press event in Denver next week. Pine Haven Clean Energy Resort. It's the same land they're trying to steal." Luke's gaze hardened. "They're rushing the launch before we can expose them." Eleanor nodded. "If I can prove their permits are fraudulent and that they're tied to sabotage here, we can shut them down." Ross Camden's cruiser rolled up minutes later, lights flashing dimly in the daylight. He climbed out, surveyed the scene, and let out a low whistle. "Whole back wall's gone. You boys sure know how to keep busy." Luke handed him the evidence bag with Cole's ID and the fuel invoice. "We found this near the fire. Check if Cole's in any of your databases." Ross took it, squinting. "Vale's right-hand man. Got it. I'll run it." When he returned a half-hour later, his expression was darker. Cole's license was suspended after an arson case down in Billings. He walked free thanks to a private settlement. And here's the fun part. The county sheriff who signed off the paperwork. Same one who oversaw Vale Corp's last land acquisition. Sam looked up sharply. "So the law's already in their pocket." Ross sighed. "Looks that way." They stood among the ruins, the mountain wind pulling smoke into thin ribbons. Rex nosed through the ashes, sniffing, searching, his tail moving slow and measured. He stopped near a half-melted metal disc. Luke picked it up. Another tracking device, same model as the first. "They were watching the place burn," Luke said, "probably recording it." Eleanor's voice trembled with controlled anger. "I'll write this story myself. Vale's empire won't survive daylight." But even as she spoke, Luke noticed movement across the road. A black SUV parked too long behind the birches, someone inside watching through tinted glass. Ross followed his gaze. "You see it too?" "Yeah, they're testing our response time." The SUV drove off slowly, as if to confirm the point. Luke turned to Ross. "Keep an eye on headquarters. If the state office stalls my report or buries the arson file, I'll know this goes higher than county." Ross hesitated. "You think the chief's involved?" Luke looked back at the smoking barn. "If he wasn't, we'd have backup by now." Snow began to fall again, thin, crystalline flakes that sparkled like tiny knives in the light. Eleanor tucked her camera into her coat. "Then it's settled. We gather everything we can before the press event. When Vale stands in front of those cameras, we'll have proof." Sam placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "Be careful, miss. Men like Vale don't lose gracefully." She smiled faintly. "Neither do the people of Pine Hollow." That night, as the valley went dark again, Luke rechecked the security system and repaired what he could. Rex lay near the porch, head resting on his paws, eyes glinting whenever headlights crossed distant hills. The air still carried the faint scent of burnt timber. Inside, Sam polished the old Remington and stared at the mantel where Marianne's photo hung. "She'd hate seeing the place like this," he said softly. Luke glanced at him. "She'd tell us to stand our ground." "Yeah," Sam said, smiling sadly, "and to feed the dog before we freeze." Luke chuckled quietly, pouring kibble into Rex's bowl. The dog ate, then looked up, as if to promise he'd keep watch. Outside, beyond the tree line, a single figure stood half hidden in the snow. Nathan Cole himself, face pale in the moonlight, phone glowing in his hand. He spoke quietly into it. The message was sent. They're not backing down. A pause, then a metallic voice replied through static. "Good, then it's time to make them disappear." The call ended. Cole pocketed the phone, turned toward the darkness of the ridge, and vanished into the storm. The blizzard returned without warning, sweeping across Pine Hollow like an army of ghosts. The mountains disappeared behind veils of white, and even the sound of the wind seemed muted, as if the valley itself were holding its breath. Inside the Keller cabin, the fire snapped and hissed, defying the cold that pressed against the windows. Luke Keller sat at the table, surrounded by tools and circuits, assembling a small network of motion sensors and cameras he'd bought years ago for mountain rescue operations. Now, they would serve another purpose: defense. Rex lay near the door, head on his paws, eyes tracking every flicker of light. He was restless tonight, the way dogs are when they sense the air shifting toward violence. Sam Keller sat nearby, cleaning the old Remington with quiet deliberation. His hands were steady, but there was a new gravity in his eyes. An old soldier's understanding that sometimes wars find you again, even when you've laid down your arms. You think they'll come back? Sam asked. Luke tightened a screw, his tone calm but clipped. They already have. The tracker from last night started transmitting again. Same frequency, new location, just beyond the creek. They're watching from the ridge. Sam nodded once, as though he'd already known. By late evening, the storm grew heavier. The world beyond the porch disappeared into gray static. Luke placed the final camera near the barn's ruins, its red light blinking faintly through the snow. Inside the cabin, the monitors flickered to life. 4 small screens showing live feeds of the perimeter. Eleanor Shaw sat near the fire, typing furiously on her laptop. She had refused to leave, despite Luke's insistence. If they're coming after you, they're coming after the truth too, she'd said. Her auburn hair fell loose now, her face illuminated by the shifting firelight. She looked tired but unyielding, the kind of journalist who believed in words the way others believed in prayer. I sent copies of all our findings to my editor, she said, but Vale Corp's lawyers are faster than I expected. They've filed injunctions to block publication. Luke frowned. So they're trying to silence the story before the Denver event. Eleanor nodded. And the sheriff hasn't responded to my calls. It's like the whole county's gone quiet. Rex suddenly rose, ears pricked, head turning toward the window. The motion sensor's soft chime sounded once, then again, louder. Luke crossed the room in 2 strides and glanced at the monitor. 3 heat signatures, moving slow but deliberate, cutting through the snow from the tree line. They're here, he said. Sam stood, loaded the rifle, and nodded toward the window. We hold them off until the sheriff gets his courage back. No sirens this time, Luke said grimly. He reached for his coat and holstered his sidearm. We handle this ourselves. The storm howled as he stepped outside. The cold hit like a fist, the kind that takes the air from your lungs. Snow slashed sideways, turning the world into a blur of white and shadow. He could barely make out the porch light, a single golden sphere against the darkness. Rex padded beside him, his black and tan fur dusted with frost, breath pluming like smoke. At the edge of the property, 3 figures advanced, men dressed in dark winter gear, goggles reflecting faint red light. Their movements were military, practiced. Luke crouched behind a woodpile, watching as they split. 2 circling toward the barn's ruins, 1 creeping along the fence line. Rex's low growl vibrated through the snow. Easy, boy, Luke whispered. Wait for my mark. From behind the barn, a sudden clang broke the stillness. A tripwire bell Luke had set hours before. The men froze, then one barked an order. Move! Luke and Rex moved first. They emerged from behind the woodpile, snow spraying beneath their boots. Rex lunged like a bullet, tackling the nearest intruder. The man went down hard, his weapon flying into the snow. The second man fired, a muffled burst from a suppressed pistol, but the shot went wide. Luke returned fire, his round clipping the shooter's shoulder and sending him staggering back into the drifts. Drop it, Luke shouted, advancing through the storm. The third man emerged from the fence line, raising a flashlight, and froze when he found himself staring into the twin barrels of Sam Keller's rifle. Hands where I can see 'em, son, Sam said evenly, his voice carrying over the wind like something carved from granite. The 3 intruders dropped, defeated more by precision than numbers. The snow around them glowed faintly under the flashlights, like a stage set for justice. Minutes later, Ross Camden arrived in his cruiser, the engine struggling against the snow. He helped cuff the men and haul them into the back seat. State police will want statements, he said. Before that, Luke replied, we get answers. They brought the captured men into the cabin, one at a time. The leader, broad-shouldered, early 40s, face carved with hard living, sat across from Luke at the table, wrists zip-tied. His name, according to his wallet, was Vince Rowe, former private contractor out of Colorado Springs. You work for Vale Corp? Luke asked. Rowe smirked. Work's a strong word. I do favors. Such as? Convincing stubborn people to see reason. Luke leaned closer, eyes cold. Vale Corp's drilling lithium under federal land. You're part of that operation. Rowe's grin faltered, just slightly. You don't know what you're talking about. Eleanor turned her camera on, recording every word. Then enlighten us, she said. Rowe hesitated, then exhaled through his nose, the arrogance draining from his expression. Vale's running a shadow project, calls it the Pine Haven Initiative. They're extracting lithium illegally from underprotected wetlands, covering it up as geothermal testing. The state police chief's on the payroll. So is your sheriff. He nodded toward Ross. You didn't hear that from me. Ross's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He'd suspected as much. What's Vale planning tomorrow? Luke asked. Rowe laughed bitterly. He's unveiling the Pine Haven Resort project at Denver Grand. Cameras, investors, government officials, all of it wrapped in talk about clean energy. Meanwhile, he's buying silence with money and fear. Luke's expression hardened. And if we expose him? Rowe shrugged. He'll call it slander. You'll be painted as local vigilantes. He's got half the state in his pocket. The wind rattled the cabin walls. Rex barked once, sharp and urgent, and Luke realized how quiet it had become outside. The storm was easing, but the silence that followed was heavier than the wind. Eleanor lowered her camera. We have what we need, she said. A confession, evidence, everything. If we can get this to Denver before the press event, we can ruin him. Rowe gave a dry laugh. You think he doesn't expect that? You think he hasn't planned for it? Luke stood, motioning Ross to take the prisoners. Let him plan. We'll be ready. As Ross led the men out, Rowe paused at the door and turned back, his face half lit by the fire's glow. You can't win, Keller. Tomorrow you'll be the villain. Vale controls the story. Luke watched him disappear into the storm, his words hanging in the cold air like prophecy. When the door closed, Eleanor turned to Luke. He's right about one thing. We have to control the story first. I'll leak the audio tonight. Luke shook his head. No, if you leak it now, Vale's people will spin it before morning. We need him to expose himself, live in front of cameras. And how do we do that? Luke looked toward the evidence board pinned on the wall. Photos, maps, and Vale Corp's name circled in red. We bring the truth to him. In Denver. Rex lifted his head as if in approval. Sam stood by the window, watching the snow ease into soft drifts. Son, he said quietly, if you go up against men like Vale, you better take something stronger than a badge. Luke met his father's eyes. I've got something stronger. He placed a hand on Rex's head. Faith, and a dog who doesn't know fear. Outside, the storm broke apart, revealing a sky of fractured stars. In the distance, the faint glow of the highway cut through the valley like a promise. Tomorrow, the fight would move from snow to city, from silence to spotlight, and when it did, truth would either burn bright or be buried forever. The storm ended at dawn, leaving behind a valley made of glass. Pine Hollow glittered in silence beneath the pale gold light that followed blizzards, the kind of light that feels like a truce, not a victory. Smoke still rose from the ruins of the barn, but the air smelled clean again. Luke Keller watched it from the porch, Rex beside him, the shepherd's coat brushed with frost and dawn's first glow. Somewhere behind the mountains lay Denver, where truth and power were about to collide. 2 days later, the Keller truck pulled up outside the Helena Grand Hotel, a marble tower wrapped in banners that read, Pine Haven, the future of clean energy. The contrast was almost obscene. Inside, chandeliers and velvet carpets. Outside, mud from the mountain road still caked Luke's boots. Rex padded close to his side, a quiet guardian in a place built for handshakes and lies. Eleanor Shaw adjusted her press badge at the entrance, her expression calm but electric with purpose. She had spent the past 48 hours editing the confession video and synchronizing it with Luke's body cam footage. Once Vale starts his speech, she murmured, we stream the file. The evidence will override the event feed. Luke nodded, eyes scanning the lobby. He had traded his uniform for a simple gray suit, clean lines, no shine, but his badge still pinned at the pocket, a small statement of who he was. He carried himself like a man prepared to be both officer and witness. The ballroom was already full. Cameras lined the back walls. Reporters filled every seat. Vale Corp banners fluttered beneath spotlights, their slogan, Harnessing Nature for Tomorrow, projected in giant letters. And then Richard Vale entered. He was in his early 50s, impeccably dressed, tall and smooth-faced in a way that money preserves. His hair was silver at the temples, his eyes bright with the confidence of someone used to controlling every room he walked into. To the public, he was a visionary. To Luke, he was a man with fire on his hands. Vale stepped up to the podium, smile sharp enough to cut ice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for joining us as we open a new chapter in sustainable innovation. Pine Haven will represent not only clean energy, but a cleaner conscience for this great state." Applause swelled through the ballroom. Luke's fingers tightened around his phone, the one connected to the projection system Eleanor had infiltrated. At the rear of the hall, Eleanor whispered into her headset, "Ready on your mark." Vale continued, voice smooth as polished stone. "For too long, people have resisted progress. But we must look beyond fear. We must trust companies like Vale Corp to guide us toward the light of change." Luke exhaled slowly. "Let's show them what his light looks like." He tapped the command key. The main screen behind Vale flickered once, then again, and the audience murmured as the corporate logo dissolved into static. For a heartbeat, confusion hung in the air. Then the image sharpened, grainy video from the Keller cabin, time-stamped and raw. Vince Rowe's recorded voice filled the speakers. "Vale's running a shadow project, calls it Pine Haven Initiative, extracting lithium illegally, sheriff's on the payroll, so's the chief." Gasps cut through the crowd. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. Vale's face drained of color, then darkened into fury. "Cut the feed," he barked, turning toward his team. But the technicians froze. The system was locked. The footage continued, Eleanor's camera catching the Vale Corp letterhead, the drilling cylinder, the bloodied tracker. Then the final clip. Vale himself, during a private call, ordering Nathan Cole to clean up the Keller property permanently. The room erupted, shouts, camera flashes, security guards moving in confusion. Luke stepped forward, voice steady. "Richard Vale," he called, loud enough to rise above the noise. "You're under arrest for bribery, conspiracy, and unlawful destruction of property." Vale spun, his composure cracking. "You can't. This is defamation, you—" But Luke was already showing his badge, every syllable like a strike of a gavel. "By authority of the Montana State Police, I'm detaining you pending federal investigation." Reporters circled, microphones raised. Eleanor kept filming, her expression fierce and radiant, as if this was the story she'd been born to tell. Rex barked once, sharp and commanding, as state officers, summoned by Ross through the governor's office, entered the ballroom. Their presence silenced the last of Vale's bluster. Two approached the podium, placing cuffs on his wrists. The sound of metal closing around them was small, almost tender, but it broke the spell completely. "Get your hands off me!" Vale shouted, struggling. "I own half this state." Luke met his eyes. "Then you can afford a good lawyer." Applause began, hesitant at first, then growing. People who had feared Vale now stood, clapping not just for Luke, but for what he represented, the idea that truth could still stand tall. Eleanor lowered her camera, tears bright in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered. Luke shook his head, glancing at the German shepherd sitting proudly by his side. "We did it." Rex lifted his head and barked again, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to echo through the grand hall like a benediction. Hours later, the frenzy had ebbed. Vale was in custody, escorted to federal holding by Denver police. The ballroom stood half empty, littered with crumpled papers and camera cords. Eleanor leaned against the stage railing, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "It's over," she said. "The story's out. Every network has it." Luke looked out through the glass doors at the snow beginning to fall over the city. "It's never over," he said, quietly. "There'll always be another Vale, but at least now people know his name." Ross joined them, dusted in road snow, his face split by a grin. "Governor just called. He wants to talk to you, Luke. Turns out when you arrest a billionaire on live TV, people notice." Luke gave a small, tired smile. "Tell him I'm just a cop who did his job." Ross chuckled. "You're also the headline hero of the week." Eleanor reached into her bag and handed Luke a folded newspaper proof. The headline read, "The Keller Files, How a War Veteran's Land Exposed a Corporate Lie." Underneath, a photo captured Luke, Sam, Eleanor, and Rex standing in the snow before the Keller cabin. The image glowed like something holy, the light of a home reclaimed. Luke traced the picture with his thumb. He'd like this, he murmured, thinking of his mother. Eleanor smiled softly. She'd be proud. You fought for more than land. You fought for her memory. Outside, sirens faded into distance. The snow thickened, soft and forgiving. Luke crouched beside Rex, rubbing his neck. Time to go home, partner. The shepherd looked up, tail thumping, eyes reflecting the ballroom lights like twin embers. They stepped outside together. The city glimmered beneath the falling snow. Cold skyscrapers turned gentle under winter's mercy. Somewhere behind them, cameras still rolled, broadcasting the truth. But for Luke Keller, the fight was already behind him. Ahead lay only the long road north, the scent of pine, and a valley waiting for spring. The winter finally broke its silence. 3 months after the storm and the scandal, the mountains of Pine Hollow stood softened beneath the pale blush of spring. The snow retreated up the slopes like an old soldier giving way to peace. Rivers sang again, freed from their icy prisons, and the scent of wet pine filled the air like memory come alive. At the edge of the valley, where the hills leaned gently toward the horizon, stood the Keller homestead, rebuilt from ashes and faith. The barn had new timber, clean lines, and a fresh coat of red that gleamed in the morning light. On the front gate, a handmade sign read in careful letters, Keller Homestead, since 1902, protected by the people of Montana. Sam Keller was out in the orchard, kneeling beside the young apple trees. His hands, though rough and scarred, moved with patience and tenderness. He tied a guiding string between the saplings, whispering the same words he used to speak to his late wife, Mary Ann, each planting season. Grow straight, girl, reach for the sun. He paused for a moment, catching his breath. The wind carried the distant echo of laughter from the field, a sound he hadn't heard in years. Luke Keller stood by the old training yard, now transformed into the Rex K-9 Academy, a modest but well-kept training center for mountain rescue dogs. The wooden fence was newly painted, and the open field stretched toward the blue ridge like a promise fulfilled. Rex, now wearing a bright orange rescue harness, was demonstrating commands to a small group of young handlers, local volunteers, park rangers, and even a few veterans who had come to learn. The German Shepherd moved with precision and joy, bounding through obstacles with the grace of a creature born for service. "Rex, search!" Luke called. The dog darted into the tall grass, nose to the ground, tail sweeping like a pendulum of purpose. Within moments, he found the hidden glove, barked twice, and sat proudly beside it. The trainees clapped and laughed. "That's the difference between obedience and trust," Luke told them, smiling. "A good dog doesn't follow orders. He believes in the person giving them." His voice carried warmth that Pine Hollow had not known since before the fires. Eleanor Shaw stood by the fence, camera in hand, capturing the moment for her latest article. She was dressed simply, flannel shirt, jeans, boots that still held the dust of 100 miles, but her eyes shone with the same fierce light that had once driven her into storms for the truth. "I still can't believe you stayed," Luke said, joining her. "Someone had to write the ending," she replied, smiling. "Besides, Pine Hollow has better coffee than Denver." They both laughed, but beneath the laughter lay something deeper, a quiet gratitude, the kind that doesn't need words. Eleanor's article, "The Soldier and the Snow, A Father's Land, A Son's Fight," had gone on to win regional awards and national attention. Donations had poured into Pine Hollow. Local carpenters helped rebuild the Keller property, and the town council passed new land protection ordinances in the wake of the Vale Corp scandal. The mountains had spoken, and this time, people had listened. Rex trotted up to them, tail wagging, muzzle dusted with grass. Eleanor bent to scratch his ears. "You're famous, you know," she said. "Every rescue dog program in the state is named after you now." Rex tilted his head, as if modesty were his best trait. Luke laughed softly. "Don't tell him that. His ego's already bigger than mine." Across the field, Sam waved from the orchard. Luke excused himself and walked over. The older man leaned against a spade, smiling faintly. "Trees are taking well this year," Sam said. "Your mother would have liked that." "She would," Luke replied. "I can almost hear her saying it's about time I used my hands for something other than chasing criminals." Sam chuckled. "She always said you had your stubbornness from me and your patience from her. Guess that's why you didn't give up on this land." Luke looked around, the house rebuilt, the orchard budding, Rex resting under the shade. "It wasn't patience, he said quietly. It was faith, even when it didn't make sense. Sam nodded, eyes soft with pride. Faith's a strange thing. It doesn't make life easier. It just reminds us we're not walking alone. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind combing through the orchard. Then Sam reached into his coat and pulled out a small carved cross. It was rough, made from the old barn wood before it burned. I thought you should have this, he said, a reminder that some things can rise again, even after fire. Luke turned it in his hand, feeling the grain, the warmth of the wood. Thank you, Dad. No, Sam said, thank God. That evening, the valley glowed in the pink light of sunset. The volunteers had gone home, and only the Kellers remained. Inside the house, dinner simmered on the stove, Sam's chili recipe, passed down like scripture. Eleanor sat at the table typing notes, while Rex lay near the door, dreaming quietly, paws twitching as if chasing something joyous through the fields of his mind. Luke stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the last of the snowmelt trickle down the hill. The sky stretched wide and clear, the kind of sky that makes a man feel small but blessed. Sam joined him, standing shoulder to shoulder. It's peaceful again, he said. Luke smiled. For now. You think it'll last? Luke looked at the stars. Maybe not, but that's not what matters. What matters is that we stand ready when it doesn't. From inside, Eleanor called out, You two better come eat before I finish all the cornbread. Sam laughed, a full, hearty laugh that startled even himself. He clapped Luke on the back and turned toward the door. But before going in, he stopped and looked out over the valley. You know, he said softly, you didn't just save this place, son. You saved the part of me that still believed people could fight for something good. Luke's throat tightened. He put a hand on his father's shoulder. No, Dad, God saved us. We just kept the faith long enough for him to act. A quiet fell between them, the kind that hums with peace. The breeze moved through the pines like a benediction. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang from the town below. Rex lifted his head at the sound and barked once, a single note of joy that carried across the fading light. Luke smiled. Hear that? Even he knows grace when he hears it. Sam nodded. Then let's not keep Grace waiting. They went inside together. Later that night, after the fire had dimmed and Eleanor had gone to rest, Luke stepped out once more. The stars shimmered over the mountains, and the orchard glowed faintly in moonlight. He knelt by Rex, who lifted his head, eyes half-lidded with contentment. Good boy, Luke whispered. We made it home. The dog leaned closer, resting his head against Luke's knee. In that small, wordless moment, there was no need for applause or headlines, only the quiet certainty that faith, once tested, had held true. The wind carried the faint fragrance of apple blossoms beginning to bloom, the first since the fire. And as the night deepened, Pine Hollow breathed again, no longer just a place on a map, but a living hymn to endurance, redemption, and the small miracles that follow those who refuse to surrender. Sometimes God's greatest miracles are not thunder or fire, but quiet moments that remind us we are never alone. Just like Sam, Luke, and Rex, we all face storms that try to break our faith, but God never leaves us. He works through courage, through love, and through the people and loyal hearts He places in our path. In our own lives, when we choose kindness over anger, faith over fear, and forgiveness over pride, we become part of His miracle. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Today, leave a comment to tell us what you believe in, and type Amen to thank God for the light that still guides us. Subscribe for more stories of faith, love, and the everyday miracles that remind us God is still here, watching over us all. May He bless you and your family always.